Hello and welcome back to another EDH deck design video. Today I'm going to be kind of catching up. I'm going to be recording this and also an updated list for my Maryland deck. Here we have Braids Conjurer Adept. This has been a brew I've been working around for about a month now. It started from a experimental design and it has been slowly upgraded after a few weeks of play. I'm going to go ahead and show what I am playing here today. This is not your typical mono blue like deck at all. There's 0 counterspells in the deck, and that is a great thing to tell your opponents because that also alleviates a lot of pressure. This has been classified by most of my friends as the trolliest deck I have ever run. It is essentially a mass bounce and manipulation deck. So Braids here, this is the shifted version of my favorite Braids, the black Braids, where we have 2 blue for a 2/2 human wizard. Instead of our little crazy Braids where we have to sacrifice things on our upkeep, this one instead gives us the ability to drop an artifact, creature, or land from our hand into play at the beginning of our upkeep. This is a before draw step. You do not get things with cast triggers like the old Eldrazi Titans. But essentially on your upkeep, after you untap, it just goes on the stack, you may drop something. Depending on your level of douchebaggerness, you may not want to remind your opponents what this does. Quite often, your opponent will miss the trigger and forget. But of course, it is your level of kindness, whatever you are actually trying to get your opponents to do if you want to help remind them. A deck like this, a lot of people would think, would try to run just a whole bunch of big, scary creatures to take advantage of this. Not really. There's actually about 3 or 4 actually large creatures in this deck. This deck is more about mass bounce and manipulation. I will show you the full deck I'm playing now. I am missing 4 cards: a Riptide Laboratory, a Consecrated Sphinx, a Sower of Temptation, and an Oblivion Stone. 4 rather expensive cards, and I don't have the excess funds to purchase these, and I cannot find them for trade. So keep that in mind while viewing this list. Those are 4 cards I definitely need. So Braids over here. She is the general of the deck. She honestly doesn't actually come out very often. She may come out if I see a very good opening start, maybe a Mana Crypt or Soul Ring start, because seeing her on turn 2 is fun. She may also never come out. She may be there essentially just to bait out removal. There are effects that do help with this, but after playtesting this for about a week, average to more skilled opponents can see things like that, and this deck does not take advantage of her ability extensively to the point that those beneficial effects are not included. Well, some are. But in short, let's get her over here. I'll talk more about her as we go, but for starters, the creature package. Again, this is a deck that is built for multiplayer tables. This is a traditional EDH deck, so 100 card, 40 life, whatnots. This is designed for multiplayer tables, so longer games are good. This deck suffers against 1v1, and something like this is very dangerous to play 1v1 because an opponent can take immediate advantage before you, which will happen. This has, of course, backfired. Just running her is always the potential is always there just to have it blow up in your face. I have definitely seen her come out on turn 2 a few times, and I have definitely seen my opponent drop an Ulamog with her and then cast a haste outlet on that turn and kill me. That will happen. Now, the odds of that happening are not always high, but that is the fun, chaotic part of casting and playing with Braids. You may never want to have her out against specific decks if you know that specific deck has a tendency for big, hasty creatures or haste outlets. So for the deck itself, to get to that late game, we have Dreamscape Artist. It is a Harrow, another random shifted card. It's a Harrow where we can tap, pay, discard a card, sack a land, get 2 basics from our deck into play untapped. Good ramp. Gilded Drake is kind of where this deck's at. It's more along the theft theme of things. 2 drop to take whatever the opponent cheated into play with Braids is ideal. Fate Spinner. This is fantastic. This is more of a troll card, a stall mechanic. Most of the time, this will not actually do anything in a larger multiplayer table because people will just develop their board state and continue to skip combat. At specific times in the game, although, this can absolutely disrupt an opponent. If they need to draw, they need to cast something, or they need to attack, or all of the above. Again, a highly situational card tends to make funny board states. Muldrifter, something great to drop in with Braids just to draw 2. And we have 2 ramp guys here, Burnished Heart and Solemn. This is more or less a mono blue ramp deck with how it tends to play. Phyrexian Metamorph, there is a clone package here. Not a lot of clones, but again, the clones typically go after ramp creatures themselves. So we have, this one is probably the best since we continually bounce it, paying 4 so we can use Braids to cast it for free, or get it out for free and then bounce it later. There's the Impersonator. Gigantoplasm's great. This is a new clone, strictly better than Clone, because we can pay to make it bigger, like the Mirror Entity. We have another Upkeep clone where we can morph or remorph, and another Bounce clone. And Venser, this is the only control essence in the deck. Like, there's no counter spells. There's a massive complement of bounce spells, but this is the only one that interacts with something on the stack. So he's our only control card. Arcanus is another really good card with Braids, specifically. So she costs 4 to get out, and on the next turn you could drop Arcanus. You already have the 4 mana to save him. So essentially getting him out for free, and then paying 4 to bounce him if something were to Wrath. It's just a really powerful card in general. Then we have the Primordial here, helps us get a spell from an opponent's graveyard, a fairly big creature that we try to swing with, a Fact or Fiction on a flyer. Another Sphinx, this is a placeholder for the Consecrated one. This is really fun. It's a sort of bribery guessing game, but again, this is a placeholder until I get the Consecrated Sphinx. Then we have another one that may let us combo. There's a few cards in the deck. One specific one that helps us bounce every single turn, so if an opponent accidentally casts an extra turn spell, we can combo with their spell with this guy, since he does not exile the spell. Then we are getting into what the deck really likes to do, which is mass bounce. We have Scourge of Fleets, which is an Island's Matter, or a Land's Matter kind of mass bounce. And Ketheric Leviathan, which is a great card to combo with clones, because you can cast this, and you will Devastation Tide. Then next turn you can clone it, bouncing the original to your hand, and Devastation Tide, and every single turn you get to do it again. It's really good at stalling the game, getting into late game. It's also really good at pissing off your friends. Get this over here. So again, not a lot of big creatures. We do need the opponent's creatures to win with, typically. There are, again, a large chunk of bounce spells in the deck. The deck, again, I think this is why my friends call this a troll deck, because it just delays the game until I am capable of winning. For a mono blue deck without time walks and without counter magic, that seems really fun. So this entire stack is bounce. We have the obvious one, Cyclonic Rift and Capsize. Then we have lots of commonly played ones to more obscure ones, and we'll just go through all these. Washout is bounce all of a colored I choose, so I can get enchantments and things. And Engulf the Shore is brand new. This is a really powerful card in a mono blue deck with lots of islands. And it's an instant speed bounce all creatures with toughness less than the number of islands I control. We have a Whelming Wave to get rid of the non-Kraken, Leviathan, Octopus, Serpents. Aether Eyes, which bounces attackers. Aether Spouts, which is strictly crueler and meaner than Aether Eyes, which puts them on the top or bottom. Opponents really don't like this card. Like, this is a card that I cannot recommend enough. This is a card that needs to see much more play in EDH. This can really ruin some people. Evacuation is a good old classic. Aether Gale, this is a more odd card I'm not super happy with. It does target non-creature permanents, which is a good thing. It's essentially any non-land permanent, but this can help get rid of enchantments and artifacts as well. It only hits 6 and it's cost 5. It's okay. Then we have Devastation Tide, the original. And then we have the new Devastation Tide, which is a surge cost, but also may give us a Kraken to attack with. Inundate, which is a good old mono blue non-bounce, or any non-blue creature bounce. And Displacement Wave, which is another card I'm in between. It's an X bounce where X is the mana cost. So this will, of course, set our own stuff back, but that may be a good thing. Now, past that, we do have lots of dirty other semi-control-ish spells and draw spells. One of which I love Ensnare. This is a good old classic. It's a free spell that tends to get people when they are unexpecting something like this, because rarely do people expect Ensnare. It is a 4 to instantly tap all creatures, or I can just instead bounce 2 islands to tap all creatures. Essentially a fog. Curse of the Swine and All's Dust is our spot removal, or our wipe, our only removal we actually have past like Nervin Rules discs. Again, I need an Oblivion Stone to fit this. Then we have Draw, Fact or Fiction, Plea for Power, which is essentially a draw 3. No one will ever give me the extra turn. Flow of Ideas, this tends to draw me 12 plus cards every time I cast it. And a Reoccurring Insight just to top off. We do have the 2 X spells. These are typically used for myself, but how this deck tends to play, I tend to get a gratuitous amount of mana. Like, I will all too frequently have over 20 lands in play if I am not immediately hated out of the game when my opponents recognize what I'm playing. So some of these are held for late game to actually deck a person, and I will oftentimes try to get myself down to just a few cards, meaning I continually cast this and resetting my deck so I cannot myself be decked. Then we have Tempt with Reflections for a few more clone variants. This is great at getting a Solemn, because everyone wants to get a Solemn, and then I get more Solemns. Rite of Replication, just to go crazy with some of the big creatures I do have. I get more Solemns. Psychic Spiral is a pseudo win condition. This has milled out a total of 3 opponents so far. In a most recent game, I had a Fate Spinner out, and the opponent was down to 1 card in his deck after I reset my library. And he was essentially at the mercy of me keeping my Fate Spinner alive so he would not draw death himself. This is a very expensive card. I am thinking about putting in a Call to Mind so I can bring this back, so I do have, like, I don't have to rely on something like an Elixir of Immortality in between. Essentially, this just resets my deck into my graveyard and I mill somebody. The way this was a late inclusion that came after a few weeks of playing it, because this deck has a very good rate of just digging into my deck and drawing so many cards and seeing my graveyard fill up. And it's actually very good. And Mirror Match is another random win condition that could be played out of nowhere. It just gives me a big boost of enter the battlefield tricks depending on who I get. I don't get to keep them forever, but if someone's attacking me with a giant pile of army of enter the battlefield do stuffs, this will give me a nice big advantage. This has saved me against a Crater Hoof attack quite a few times already. Going on that, we have a pile of enchantments. They are the enchantments that you would expect to be in a creature light Braids deck. We have control enchantments, essentially the cheap ones, the cost-efficient ones, to take the opponent's good stuff that they cheat in with Braids. Again, that's not always going to work. You cannot play every single one of these because not all opponents are going to cheat in creatures with Braids. So we only have the cost-efficient ones. Things like Volition Rings, not good enough. We have Control Magic, Corrupted Conscience. This has a very specific flavor text where you have to actually ask your opponent why they're playing Infect before you cast this card. Then you control on them. It is a mind control that gives the creature Infect. This is fantastic, especially when your opponents are playing Ruark Thar or the new Omnath. Mind Control, which oddly enough, this promo card costs 10 cents. And we have an old Persuasion. I've never liked the new Persuasion's artwork. I just think the weird looking guy. Yeah. And then the best of the best is Treachery. Yes, it costs 1 more than Control Magic, but you get to untap your lands even before you go after the creature. Then we have a few other enchantments here. Heuristic Study is just a slow draw. Smarter opponents know how to work around this. A lot of people don't care sometimes. Paradox Haze. This is a remnant, a card that will most likely be replaced with Oblivion Ring, or Oblivion Stone. What it does, it gives an enchanted player an extra upkeep. I enchant myself. Braids triggers on the upkeep. This means I can have 2 triggers with Braids. This is essentially a way for me to cast or get extra lands in play. That's what this nets up doing. It's like exploration. Because then again, in this deck, I don't have a lot of things I want to flash in past lands and maybe a few clones. I'll show some of my cards I have recently cut and playtested with. There's other tech that people tend to use with Braids exclusively. But believe me, in this day's EDH era of power creep and card power, essentially, you can't really just focus all on Braids. You're setting yourself up for failure by doing that. This is a generically good card that also gives me... It's more or less a threat to be baited out and removed because people see that interaction. I'm on the fence of putting this, or taking this back out for Vanishing, which was another card. I'll just show that shortly. The last we have Sunken Hope. This is another placeholder. This will most likely be the Sower of Temptation. This is a very fun card to have out. It's very situational. This may be very bad. It may be very good, although. Essentially, just every upkeep, every player has to bounce a singleton creature. This may absolutely destroy a Voltron player. Although this may absolutely give someone playing Enter the Battlefield stuff just a fantastic dig, because every single turn you can rebuy something. Again, this is something that may be a dead draw depending on how you're playing out the deck. Your opponents are also probably going to find some way to take advantage, but again, if the opponents have a massive army of tokens, it's just not going to do anything. It's situational. It can be good, it can be very bad. Past that, we do have some artifacts. There's not a lot of ramp in this deck since I'm relying on Braids to give me mana. This is a fake mana crypt, and we have a Soul Ring. These two allow me for a turn to Braids. That is the only reason I am willing to put this mana crypt in the deck, because a turn to Braids makes for fun and exciting games. I'm not going to just ruffle stomp somebody, obviously, but having that effect come out so fast does make for a lot of chaos. And this deck excels when there's chaos on the table. If this were to be switched out to another card, I would put a Riptide Laboratory in here, so I would go up to 20 or 37 lands. Then we have a Soul Ring and Wayfarer's Bauble because I like basic lands in this deck. I actually had a Back to Basics in here when this deck started. I love that card, but it was too mean for what this deck was trying to do, so I had to take that out. This is a fantastic card to get out with any of my creatures, because basic land ramp is what this deck really wants. This is essentially a mono blue ramp deck, and this does exactly that. Then we have these two, and of course I am missing the Oblivion Stone. This is again what you kind of want to do with Braids. She lets you drop artifacts for free. So if you have her out for maybe 2 turns, and you are allowing your opponents to hit their benefit, and they're playing their big artifacts and their big creatures, and you're using her to drop lands, you can then use her to drop one of these and activate it. Hence you are essentially 2 for 1-ing or more your opponents. That's why I need an Oblivion Stone so bad for this deck. It's a sad one. This comes into play tapped. This is usually one of the biggest blowouts this type of deck can play. But that is, in my experience, the best thing that Braids can do right now. Alternatively, we have more theft effects with Vidalcan Shackles and Spine of Ashal. Again, this is an awkward card, but being that Braids can just drop it for free, these two are a little bit more expensive than what you would expect to see in a mono blue deck, but dropping them for free from her, that's an ideal follow-up to somebody playing their big scary creature and you just spine it for free, or you just start drawing extra cards. And finally, we are on to the lands. There are currently 36 lands in this deck. Again, I need a Riptide Laboratory to help save Braids, but we have Winding Canyons. She has a very powerful effect. If I have this and a few other lands, I can flash her out at the end of an opponent's turn, meaning I am the only one who will gain benefit of her effect. That's the only reason this is in here. Then we have Reliquary Tower because I will draw a lot of cards. This deck may need some other infinite hand size stuff, although I don't mind discarding because Psychic Spiral is a legitimate win condition in this deck. It's hard to explain that because that doesn't sound right if you are an experienced EDH player, but believe me, after weeks of playing this, my graveyard becomes 50 plus cards, and Psychic Spiral will win me the game. It has done so many times. We have Temple for extra mana, and more ramp. And then we have 32 of the exact same lands. I chose this one. I like this one because this right here always reminds me of Talaria. And I know Braids was not at all related to anyone who would have gone to Talaria West, but it's just fun to think about the blue mages, so that's why these are here. But yeah, this is my mono blue Braids deck. Braids is a very fun general. It's not a control deck. It's a more of a bounce late game clone-ish persuasion or creature theft deck. It is very interesting to play, and it does make for very chaotic game states. You may end up pissing off your friends and opponents because it does tend to drag games out for a very long time if it is left alone early game. Again, this is not something that is good to play when you only have one opponent in 1v1. Maybe even 2 very skilled and threatening opponents will just see what you're doing and get you out of the game fast. Here's a few extra cards that I had started the deck with or play tested with. This is just a really fun card. Perplexing Chimera allows you to exchange this with a spell on the stack. This is really fun when you clone it. But again, this is another Chaos card. I don't actually have a way of benefiting from things on the stack all the time, and getting this to an opponent may backfire when I have my own Persuasion enchantments coming in. It's very fun, but in this particular deck it wasn't good enough. Similarly, with her cheap entry of creatures like duplicates and whatnot, those did not actually make the cut since spot removal 1v1 is good, but I'm playing multiplayer, so things like duplicate and Jester were not good enough. Order of Succession is fantastic because I can trade off Braids for another big creature that the opponents cast. It's essentially a spell version. The problem is, again, in multiplayer tables, you're not always guaranteed to get the best creature that you want. Show and Tell is kind of what Braids does. It's just free stuff. I didn't want to put this main deck because there's no real way for me to take advantage of this. I don't have like an Omniscience or something. Vanishing is another card that's very commonly seen with Braids. Vanishing gives an enchanted creature phasing. You may see this in a Azure the Enchanter deck. So what you want to do is you want to enchant Braids with this. And then you can vanish her out so she comes in when you untap, and then you get the benefit of her ability. But you can phase her out again, and then while you're waiting for her to phase back in, going to all your opponent's turns, they don't get her ability. This can also be used to put onto an opponent's creature to screw around with their combat. That was actually what this was used for most often, because I didn't really care about keeping Braids phased out on my opponent's turn. I literally wanted them to take advantage of her ability. It's still a good card though. This deck also started with lots of combat tricks because I assumed people would attack me, my 2/2, and by Ovenizing or turning their creatures to frogs, after they declare the attackers to me, I could then kill them with my 2/2 Braids. This was just clunky, not good enough. And we have some more combat shenanigans in Domineering Will and Illusion's Gambit. Again, two very highly situational combat tricks. But yeah, I'm going to continue playing this. This is a very fun deck. A lot of my friends are not happy with seeing this when I pull it out. The problem is I don't have a big selection of decks I'm willing to play right now at my local shop. But this is a fairly... I can understand why people think this is a troll deck, because it does delay the game. The absurd amount of bounce spells is obnoxious. If the opponent does not have a haste outlet, then I am probably just going to rickroll them until I'm ready to do something to win, or until they get something to upset my board more than I can tolerate. But that's actually how the deck's played out. This is a very interesting deck. I would highly suggest this if you are looking for a very casual and fun take, especially if you have a fleeting passion for our black Braids of the Cabal, who I miss dearly. But yeah, if you have any opinions or ideas or feedback, definitely let me know.